In our reading notes today, we'll open up to page 19 to look at settings and events. So for settings and events, we need to make a visualization of the setting in order to describe it, which means that you need to be able to picture it in your mind so then you can tell someone what it looks like or pick an accurate description of what it looks like. We need to, we're developing the skill of describing how the plot unfolds, so being able to say how events then build on each other. But then you need to be able to compare and contrast two or more settings in the same story or poem, and compare or contrast two or more settings or events into different stories or poems. So what we have here are some vocab, resolution, the way that the author closes the story, plot, the order of the story events, including the problem that the characters face and how that problem's solved. So stories follow a plot. Story maps are good for looking at each part in a story, so we could break things down so we can look at our characters, look at the setting, look at the events and the solution. But the story as a whole has a flow. Stories start with an introduction, so this is why we use the story arc, because stories start with the introduction of the characters and the setting of the story. After the story has been set, the problem of the story is introduced. A solution to the story problem is not solved right away. Instead, there are many smaller events that add tension during the rising action. Then the highest point of excitement in the story happens at the climax. The problem of the story is solved, and the writer needs to tie up loose strings in the falling action, and then the story ends with the resolution that helps the reader feel like the story is complete. So we're going to label this story arc right here. So here we have the beginning of the story. The problem is this line right here, which then leads to the rising action. Then the most excitement happens at the climax, followed by the falling action as things get tied together, and then the story ends with the resolution. So let's take a look and put this into practice with two different stories. So we have two different mini stories. We're going to start off with Aesop's Fable, The Dog in the Shadow. It happened that a dog had got a piece of meat and was carrying it home in his mouth to eat it in peace. Now on his way home, he had to cross a plank lying across a running brook. As he crossed, he looked down and saw his own shadow reflected in the water beneath. Thinking it was another dog with another piece of meat, he made up his mind to have it also. So he made a snap at the shadow in the water, but as he opened his mouth, the piece of meat fell out, dropped into the water, and was never seen more. Beware lest you lose the substance by grasping at the shadow. So the first skill we have to do is be able to picture what is the setting here in The Dog in the Shadow. So I'm going to sketch real quick over here in the setting. So for the setting here, the important thing is that there's a plank laying across a brook, and that's what the dog is crossing. So there's my image of my plank over the brook. So I'm going to compare it to another story, but I'm just going to quickly jot some notes here what happens. So the setting here, there is a brook with a plank across it. The problem in the story is that the dog wants what the, and I'm going to put this in quotations because it's not really there, the other dog has. He thinks the other dog has something that he wants, which is his problem in the story. So he has meat. These are really brief events. Has meat, sees what he thinks is more meat, drops his meat, trying to get it. So the solution in the end, this is how the story ends. It's not really a good solution, but when he snatches for what he wants, he loses what he had. So in the end, he ends up with nothing because of that. Okay, so let's read the other story, and then we'll be able to compare the two. So down here, another Aesop's Fable, The Fox and the Crow. A fox once saw a crow fly off with a piece of cheese in his beak and settle on a branch in a tree. "That's for me, as I am a fox," said Master Renard, and he walked up to the foot of the tree. "Good day, Mistress Crow," he cried. "How well you are looking today! How glossy your feathers! How bright your eye! I feel sure that your voice must surpass that of all other birds, just as your figure does. Let me hear but one song from you that I may greet you as the queen of the birds." The crow lifted up her head and began to crow her best, but the moment that she opened her mouth, the piece of cheese fell to the ground, only to be snapped up by Master Fox. "That will do," he said. "That was all I wanted. But in exchange for your cheese, I will give you a piece of advice for the future. Don't trust flatterers." So the first thing I'm going to do here is draw the setting. So for my setting here, I needed really just to have a tree in nature because the fox sees the crow sitting in a tree, so I need a space for my fox to be down below and the crow to be up in the tree in a place where the cheese could drop. So there's my setting. So now I want to say it's just, really, it's a tree. It's a tree and under the tree. The problem is that the fox wants what the crow has. Ooh. And the events, fox sees crow, fox lies to crow, crow goes to sing, and so then in the end what happens is the fox gets the cheese that the crow dropped. So now how do I say how things are similar and different here? So looking at the setting, the dog in the shadow, there's a brook with a plank across it, and the fox and the crow is a tree. So I could say that both fables are in nature. The problem is pretty similar in both of them because there's one character that wants what another has. The events. There's not many things similar in the events. I'm going to skip this one, but the solution, these are actually completely well, in the solution, the dog doesn't get what he wants. The fox does. However, the crow also lost. So for both solutions, I could say that both dog and crow lost food. So sometimes the similarities might not be as obvious. You need to think through them and look for things and say, well, what is similar? What is different? Okay, so this is how we're looking at settings and events, being able to organize them for one story each, but then also comparing between two different ones.